Good evening and welcome everyone. My name is Stephanie Myers and I am USANA's Regional Sales Manager. Glad you are here for our Healthy Habits webinar. This is a 4-part series and you are watching the second one, so I'm glad you're here. The name of this is The Power of the Circadian Rhythms with Dr. Rachel Brewer. She is the director of our new product research. This is a fascinating topic and opportunity to learn. I would like you to introduce you to Sheetal Patel, a gold director with USANA from Florida, nice warm Florida, of course, who will be helping me host the call. Thank you for being here. Sheetal, can you please help me share who we get to hear from today?
Absolutely. Thank you, Stephanie. I would be honored to. Hi, friends. I'm scanning through the chat and I can't believe how many people are on at the moment. I mean, it isn't every day where we get to learn about circadian rhythms. And I don't know about you, but I love to broaden my horizons. So a little bit about our speaker. Rachel A. Brewer, PhD, is a laboratory-trained scientist whose studies have focused on molecular biology and nutrition. She completed her undergraduate studies in biological sciences at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. Her PhD studies at the University of Alabama, Birmingham investigated diet and nutritional impacts on aging and longevity, with the goal of understanding nutritional interventions to help people live healthier for longer. Dr. Brewer's interest in improving health through science has currently led her to continue her work with USANA Health Sciences, where she focuses on product development centered around the human microbiome. Please help me welcome Dr. Brewer.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I really appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and get my slides shared, and we'll jump right into this presentation. Apologize. Get this set up. Okay, so thank you again for that introduction. As I said, I'm Rachel Brewer, and I've been here at USANA for just about 5 years now. And while my focus is on food and nutrition, one of the studies that I worked on during my PhD actually focused on the intercellular circadian clock in the heart. And while again, it's not what I study anymore, the circadian clock and its role in health is still really important to me. And also I just find it really interesting. So to give a little bit of a heads up today, we will be getting into some molecular biology. So we're going to be delving into some pretty deep science here. And before we can really start discussing the role of the circadian clock in health, we have to start by understanding what the circadian clock even is. And that is a little difficult because there's actually 2 circadian clocks in your body. The first circadian clock is the one that most people think of when they think of the circadian clock. This is what's known as the master circadian clock, and it's located deep in a tiny region in your brain known as the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN. When you first wake up in the morning and open your eyes and light enters through your pupils, that light signal is transmitted directly from your eyes to your suprachiasmatic nucleus. And it tells that region that you're awake and it's time to reset your body clock to time 0. So the suprachiasmatic nucleus then releases signals to other parts of your brain that tells them to release hormones that aligns all of the cells in your body. It tells all of them that it's now time 0 and they need to get ready to start the day. Despite the fact that there's trillions of cells in your body, they all receive this signal almost instantly. Therefore, what the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the master circadian clock, has done is reset every cell in your body. And that's because every cell has its own internal circadian clock as well. These are the second type of circadian clock, known as cell intrinsic clocks. They help the functions of the cells to all keep working in rhythm together, even if the cells aren't directly communicating with each other. I know that's already been a lot of science, so let's do a quick recap. Light enters through your eyes. That signal from the light gets transmitted to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or master clock, in your brain. And then your suprachiasmatic nucleus sends a signal to all of the other cells in your body, syncing everything together. So now let's really dive in. I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking about those special cell intrinsic clocks. And again, I think they're really exciting. I kind of geek out on this type of stuff and think that it's really cool. Inside each of your cells is a nucleus. And inside of that nucleus is where your DNA is stored. And on that DNA are two very important genes called clock and BMAL1. Both of these are actually abbreviations, and you can tell that they knew what clock did when they named it, but BMAL1 doesn't have a fun acronym like clock does. Some other important circadian clock related genes are called purr and cry. The circadian clock in your cells works a little bit differently than in your brain because they don't get that same signal from light. Instead, the cells start to make proteins from the BMAL1 and clock genes. These proteins stick together and help the cell make more proteins from other circadian clock related genes like purr and cry. But the trick is that it takes a certain amount of time for these new proteins to be made. And as the cell makes more and more of them, they start to build up. And when there's enough of them, they actually get in the way and stop the clock or stop the cell from making any more of the BMAL1 and clock proteins. So the proteins that those genes help to create actually gets in the way of them making any more. Without BMAL1 and clock, the cell won't make more of those proteins. So it stops making all of these circadian clock proteins. And over time, what was already made starts to break down. And suddenly, there's not enough protein anymore to inhibit the cell from making that initial clock and BMAL1, and so it starts to make them again. This is what's known as a negative feedback loop. And what's really neat about this cycle, all these different pieces of it, is that the whole process takes just about 24 hours. Now, I promise that's as deep in the science as we're going to go. But I'd like now to talk a little bit more about that because I said it takes about 24 hours. But something that's really interesting is that in humans, it's actually closer to 24.1 hours. And that extra 1/10 of an hour doesn't seem like much. But over just 10 days, that would shift your whole body clock by an hour. And over the course of a month, your body would be 3 hours out of sync with the world around it. That's why it's so important that that master clock in your brain resets your cycle each day. The chart that you see here is what's known as an actigraph. And each bar is representing activity during one single day. So in this chart is what it would more or less look like for a human who wakes up in the morning, is active during the day, and then goes to bed at night. And you see that repeated every day. But the only way to really find out how long your true personal circadian clock is, because some people are longer than 24.1 hours, some people are shorter, is to be in an environment with no light at all, or at least no white light or blue light. Red light seems to be less able to reset your circadian clock. And if you live in an environment with no light at all, then you'll notice that your activity patterns will start to drift over time. And that's because, again, you're not having any signal to reset your master circadian clock. And the original studies that were done to calculate how long human circadian clock or circadian cycles were were actually done with volunteers who lived underground in dark caves for as long as they could with no lights or signals about what time it was. This isn't a study that many people volunteer for anymore. So that's some background on what the circadian clock or circadian clocks are and how they work. I mentioned that it's light that helps to set the master clock in your brain and reset all of the other clocks in your body. And that is true, although the clocks in your other cells can be impacted by other things as well. For example, in your liver, the cells seem to be most highly impacted by what you eat. And other cells can get confused if you're doing things at what they think is the wrong time. For example, if your body thinks that you should be sleeping, but there's a light on, it can confuse your body. Or if you normally don't eat anything after dinner, but one night eat a lot of food just before bed, things like this can disrupt your circadian clock. And that's important for all of us because disruption of your circadian clock can negatively impact your health. It's pretty clear that there's a lot of work that your body puts into keeping these clocks aligned throughout your body every single day. But the first question a lot of people ask is, why? Why does it matter so much that all of your cells are on the same schedule? And why do cells even have schedules? Well, one of the reasons is that it makes your body more efficient. If your body knows that when you wake up, you probably start moving around and eat something, it can make sure that the energy you need is ready for you to use. And it can make sure that your blood pressure has already started to go up so that when you stand up, it's ready to keep the blood up in your brain and doesn't drain to your feet and make you feel faint. And it can help make sure that the enzymes that help break down food are ready to go as soon as you eat so that you can start processing things right away. But also, by having a circadian clock in all of your cells in alignment, that makes sure that everything in your body is working together. You don't want your brain ready for you to go to bed, but your heart's ready to start the day. Or even worse, you don't want your brain ready to start the day, but your heart thinking it's time to go to bed and not able to keep up. There's also some really interesting links between mental health and circadian clocks. Scientists are still trying to understand how they impact each other. It's not fully clear yet if disruptions to the circadian clock can negatively impact mental health, or if disrupted mental health can negatively impact your circadian clock. But it is clear that individuals with mental health disorders often also have disrupted circadian clocks. It's also clear that disrupting your clock through things like shift work can lead to worsening of mental health symptoms. And again, it's not well understood if these are linked to specific genetic disruptions or if there's some other factors involved that we don't even understand yet. There's also a few conditions that are specifically due to problems in your circadian clock genes. An example is something called familial advanced sleep phase disorder. I'm not going to spend any time on that because they're very rare. Instead, I'd like to talk about a couple of things that can disrupt our circadian clock that might apply to more of us. The first is shift work, specifically working shifts that are out of sync with your normal cycle. For example, working night shifts. If your body thinks that you should be sleeping, but instead you're awake and working, it can get confused about how to set your circadian clocks and they can get misaligned. Working these types of shifts has actually been linked to increased risk of cardiovascular disease and even some types of cancer. However, there are reasons that sometimes you have to do shift work. And this isn't to say that you're doomed to poor health. There's been a lot of studies done to see how to best help your circadian clock adapt to these type of shifts. And one thing that research has shown that is one of the best things to do is to try to adapt your entire schedule. meaning even the days you're not working, try to stick to the same schedule of waking up and going to sleep. That means even if you're working the night shift during most of the week, on your days off, try to still as much as possible get up during most of the nighttime hours instead of trying to shift your cycles back and forth every week. Another disruption to the circadian clock that many of us experience is called social jet lag. And it's kind of similar to that idea of not shifting your cycles, whether you're working or on your days off. You might be familiar with jet lag, and that's when you travel across lots of time zones and struggle to adjust your body to a new time. Social jet lag is when you wake up at, say, 6 a.m. every day during the week for work, but on the weekend, you sleep in until 9 a.m. But then on Monday morning, you're back to a 6 a.m. alarm clock. This is the equivalent of flying across 3 different time zones every weekend, and it's not healthy for your circadian clock. Even just the 1 hour shift for daylight savings has been linked to increased incidence of heart attacks. So now that we've talked a little about what the circadian clock is, why it's so important, and what can happen when it gets disrupted, let's finish with a few best tips for your circadian clock. First, like we talked about, try to keep your body on a consistent schedule. This helps the clocks in your cell know what to expect each day. Second, when it's getting close to time for bed, turn off bright lights and electronics. This will help that circadian clock in your brain signal that you need to release melatonin, or the darkness hormone. Melatonin tells your body that it's time to sleep, but it won't be released in your brain unless there's no more light signals coming in saying it's time to stay awake. And when you do wake up, try to find some bright light as soon as possible to, again, signal to that clock in your brain that it's time to be awake and time to get everything moving. Finally, along with sleeping on a normal schedule, try to eat on a regular schedule as well, since that can affect some of your clocks as well. And along with that, make sure to avoid caffeine too late at night if that impacts your ability to fall asleep. I know that we've covered a lot of science today, but I hope you found this little dip into the world of circadian clocks as interesting of a topic as I do. One final piece of knowledge I would like to leave you with is that the first circadian clock gene wasn't identified in mammals until the middle of the 1990s. So our understanding of these clocks in our bodies is still very new, and there's a lot that they do that we're still learning. So keep your eyes on the research and the news that's out there, because I promise there's more exciting news about circadian clocks coming. And in the meantime, please take care of your circadian rhythms so that your clocks can help to take care of you. Thanks.
Wow, that was absolutely so impressive. Thank you so much, Dr. Brewer. I learned so much about circadian rhythms, and I tell you, just trying to figure out your true cycle and living in an environment with no light, that's just mind-boggling. And then social jet lag, you really explained it so well because it truly makes sense to me in my personal schedule for sure. Thank you for the wonderful tips. So we have some amazing Q&A questions for tonight. And my first question for you is, what can you do to set up your bedroom for success?
Sure, that's a great question, because as we talked about, that clock in your brain is so important in setting all of the clocks in your body, and light is so important to setting that first master clock. The best recommendations for your bedroom are to make sure when you sleep that it's as dark as possible. So make sure you have curtains up or heavy blinds that block any sort of light coming in, and make sure that you're not using electronics like watching TV or like a lot of us do, scrolling on your phone at night before you go to bed and getting those light signals. But if you do choose to do that, then try to turn down the brightness settings on your electronics as low as possible. And a lot of them even have the ability to invert colors so that the screen is black and the fonts are showing up in white or even red text to, again, decrease the amount of light that's going to your master circadian clock at night. And then in the morning, make sure to try and get as much light in your room as possible. So this can often mean having a light by your bedside that as soon as you wake up, you turn on to help get those signals going.
Wow, I love that. I feel like we have homework to do already.
Yes, please do.
Another question. Let's really dig deep into this bedroom. What are your honest thoughts on an alarm clock and the sounds that go with them? Do we need loud, big sounds in the morning? Do we need soft music? Do you not like alarm clocks? Where's your stance on that?
Say in an absolutely ideal world, we would all live according to our circadian rhythms, our internal ones. And everyone's are set a little bit differently. So for me, I'm more of a night person. And again, in an ideal world, I would operate always more later in the day. Unfortunately, for most of us, that's not the reality. So for most of us, the reality is that we need an alarm clock. I need 3 alarm clocks, usually most mornings. But if you're going to use an alarm clock, my best recommendation is, if possible, use one of the ones that has a light built into it that comes on and brightens automatically. That way, when the alarm goes off, you've already got a bright light ready to signal to you that it's time to go. And as far as noises, I recommend starting with a pleasant noise in the morning. Sometimes you can find ones with birds chirping or some nice music that gets you going. I think it's a great way to just get yourself up and going during the day in a positive mood. However, at the end of the day, whatever it takes to get you out of bed and get that light going and get you moving as fast as possible in the morning is the best advice. So if that means you need a very loud, annoying alarm clock to get you going in the morning, it's not the worst if you have to do that.
Thank you. That's great. Another question I have for you is, how can you trick your own circadian rhythm?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. And unfortunately, the answer is that you can't. Your circadian rhythms and your circadian clocks in your body are very good at what they do. And they're built exactly to keep you on these cycles and to respond to these signals. However, while they can't be tricked, they can be confused. So again, the best thing you can really do is to try and give your clocks what they need. So work with them instead of against them. Try to make sure to be sticking to consistent schedules with when you're waking and when you're going to sleep. And then try and get that light in the morning and no light at night so that you can fall asleep. And by doing that, even if, for example, you are a night person like myself, you can help shift your body into a different rhythm and at least get your clock knowing that it's time to get up, even if it doesn't usually want to.
Good point. Thank you. Okay, last question. What tips do you have on an eating schedule to go along with this topic? I know there's a lot of different eating schedules out there and different diets and foods, but for this, what are some good tips you have on just the food aspect of it?
Yeah, so that's a great question as well, because you're right. There's so many different ways to eat and times to eat. And the best advice I can give on that is to find an eating pattern that works for you and then stick with it. So for some people, that can mean eating just during a certain period of the day. For example, eating just during 8 hours in the middle of their day and not eating any time before or after that. If that works for you, that's great, but eat at regular times during that 8-hour interval so that your body knows to start expecting food at those times of the day. If you choose to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day spread out over the entire day, again, make sure to do that consistently. Or if you're snacking during the day, try and eat those snacks at consistent times. Again, what you do is less important than the rhythm of what you do. So at least for your circadian clocks. And what's most important with your eating patterns is, again, finding one that will work for you. So if you find one that you can do regularly to keep your clocks in line, then that's the best pattern to follow.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brewer, for all of this great information. This was fascinating and something that would have not been on top of my mind. You have definitely answered a lot of my questions for my personal circadian rhythms. Such a great learning experience filled with so much knowledge. Thank you again. Stephanie, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you guys all for joining. I hope you learned something. I hope you learned something that you could take with you and implement in your life, or a couple things that you can implement in your life. I want to also let you know that if you join us next week, same time, same Zoom link, we will be going over the importance of exercise with Katie, our senior food scientist. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for your time and have a wonderful evening. Thank you again, Dr. Rachel Brewer.